Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. On the panel with me today, joining by Zoom, are Ms. Linda Schultz and Mr. Richard Whitbread. Our assessor today is Mr. Matthew Harling, and our administrative person is Mr. Zachary Mohan. My name is Bill Moretsky. I am also on the panel and will be chairing this meeting and joining via Zoom as well. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. Matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We'll be hearing items 1 to 3 and 5 on our docket today. Mr. Mohan, please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony.
Of course, Mr. Chair. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Matthew Harling.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
My name is Jarrett Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, our first property today on the docket is item number 1855 Ellis. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Mr. Harling, can you begin your presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 24-2215. The roll number is 07569086700. The address is 1855 Ellis Avenue, and the owner is Magellan Aerospace Limited. The 2025 roll year, based on a reference date of April 1st, 2023, is assessed at $24,964,000. If you look on page 1 of my brief, under the property description information, we'll see here some information about the building. So let's say the actual and effective year built of the building are 2012. The wall heights are 36 feet. We have a land area of 262,699 square feet with a plan area of 137,095 square feet. We have a total leasable area of 138,544 square feet. And then we have a land to plan area of 1.92. Okay, so we turn to page 2 of my brief. We'll see the requests for information have been received. There are no recent sales on the subject, and there are no subject property leases in place. Okay, if we turn to page 3 of my brief, again, the property is located on 1855 Ellis Avenue. So we can see where the property is located here, just on Ellis. Just east of it would be King Edward Street. So you can see just from the heart of St. James, and close to Sargent Avenue, so close to the airport. You can see the Comair International is close by there as well. So this is where it's situated here. If we turn to page 4 of my brief, we'll just see a Google aerial view property of the property, just to see the building itself and how it's situated, where it's located again. This is, again, if we turn to page 5, this just shows the subject property, but it shows the parcel outline of the subject, just to give an idea of the overall site size, the size of the site and where the building is situated. This is continued on page 6, just more zoomed in. You've got a better idea of the building. Again, this is continued on page 7, just another view. If we turn to page 8, you can see a better view of the building, just again to see the overall shape of it. So basically rectangular shape. You can see the wall heights and where it's situated again here. Page 9 of my brief, you'll just see a photo from a different angle, just to show the building from the south side. And then at the bottom here, you can just kind of see the another picture of the photo of the subject property. And then lastly on page 10, this is just the view of from the rear of the building. So just to get an idea of the overall shape, size of the building here. So on these pictures. If we turn to page 11, this is just the street view picture of the property, just as seen from the street view. So you can kind of see this is for the front of the building here is how it's situated. And then if we go to page 12, this is just some further photos, just going towards down Ellis, towards east of the building, just to show the building itself. So these would be just some pictures of the subject property. Okay, so now if we turn to page 13 of my brief, we'll see the income break or workup. So this is considered a manufacturing warehouse, a light manufacturing warehouse. You'll see the leasable area is 138,544 square feet. We're applying a model net rent of $9.92 a square foot, which gives us a potential rent of $1,374,356. We're allowing 4.5% for vacancy, which then gives us an effective gross income of $1,312,510. We're allowing 3% for non-controllable expenses, as well as $4 a square foot for shortfall, which then gives us an overall net operating income of $1,248,197. And then lastly, we are applying an overall capitalization rate of 5%, which gives us the estimated value of $24,964,000. Okay, so now if we turn to page 14 of my brief, do the rent comparables. Being a larger building, there are limited comparables out there, but trying to find comparables similar, so these are some of the comparables that we tried to find, or I applied. So the first comparable here is located at 310 Debate Street. This lease started in November 1st, 2017. It's a 5-year lease. The area is 51,746 square feet. It's got 24-foot wall heights. It was built in 2008, and it's $9.05 net rent. So this is located in the St. Boniface Industrial Park. Comparable number 2, 230 Notre Dame Avenue. So this is October 1st, 2017 lease. It's a 5-year lease, 53,016 square feet, 20-foot wall heights, 1961 figure built, and an $8 rent. Next property here is located at 1717 Ellis. This is a December 1st, 2019 lease, 5 years. It's an 81,005 square feet. Leasable area. It has 27-foot wall heights, 1975, and a $9 rent. So this is close to the subject property. This is I will mention this is I believe it's a parts store, this particular building. So now comparable number 4, this is on 80 Haggard Avenue. So this is just off of located around the Inkster area. So this is a more recent lease, June 1st, 2021. It's a 15-year lease. It's 119,555 square feet, 32-foot wall heights, built in 2021, and it has a $16.54 rent. I will note that this is this building it's obviously the newer the subject. Obviously, we're not anywhere near this rent, but this is a newer building, fairly similar size. 1001 Regent Avenue West. This is again on Regent. So this is a January 1st, 2020 lease. It's a 1-year lease, 121,815 square feet, 15-foot wall heights, built in 1980, and it's got a $9.16 rent. This is actually the Amazon distribution center in Regent, so that's what the building's being leased for. And then lastly, the last comparable is at 195 Haggard Avenue. This is a 3-year lease starting September 15th, 2020. It's 148,263 square feet, 38-foot wall heights, built in 2020, and this has a $9.55 rent. This is very close to comparable number 3 on 80 Haggard Avenue. So So those would be some of the more recent, newer buildings, some of the comparables. So these are some of the comparables. These are the comparables I provided. So I believe they would bracket the rent in place that we're, the model rent in place that we're applying for the subject. So going to page 15, my brief, just some cap rate information. The cap rate is 5% for this property. I will note this, there's some pictures of the property I'll go into, but this is, this being a newer build, it's good location, good access. It is being used by Magellan Aerospace, so they're a very well-known, aerospace company. So, so this is a very, good quality building. So those would be some of the factors, based on age, size, location, which would denote the cap rate. So it does fall outside some of the outside sources they're indicating, but, based on the condition and those qualities of the building, those would be some of the factors of why we would be applying the lower capitalization rate. If we turn to page 16 of my brief, we'll just see some information regarding some Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. Go to page 17 of my brief. This is the income expense mailer. It's owner occupied. It's obviously being used by Magellan. So this is just showing that they did provide the actual mailers for us. So this continues on page 18 and 19. If we go to page 20, this is a floor plan of the building. I apologize if you're looking at your computer, maybe you can zoom in some of the buildings, but this is the basic layout of the building. You can see some of the different sections. So they have like a paint room and a main plant room, clean room. So this is just kind of a breakdown of the overall building, just to give an idea. All right, now so we turn to page 21. These are just some photos of the subject property. I did not inspect the property recently, so these are some photos that were taken probably closer to when the building was built or a few years after it was built. But this is just some photos. So this starts on page 21. As I indicated, this is Magellan Aerospace, so they deal with a lot of sophisticated, they're building aerospace, parts for, not commercial planes. They're building for like, high sophisticated planes and such. If we go to page 22, here's some further photos of the building. Like for example, at the top of page 22, I can tell you that's from a fighter jet. So they're dealing with some very sophisticated materials in here and such. So page 23, this is just some further photos of the building. So you can see it's some very sophisticated equipment they have in there. This continues on page 24 and 25. These are just some photos of some of what they develop here. So page 26 here, this is just essentially a article talking about when the building was built in, in 2011 when it was first started. Just talking about the building, some of the reasons they built the building. They were awarded a contract to build some fighter jets, as you can see here. So that's why this building's used to develop those types of parts for these planes and such. So that's just an article talking about when it was developed and why it was developed, is due to this contract that they required. If we go to page 20 of my brief, this is just another news article. Again, just talking about the contract they were awarded and the fact that they were building this $22 million facility back in 2011 or 2010. This article's from, so then they were developing this facility. And then if we turn to page 29, this is just a brief description about kind of just talking about what Magellan Aerospace does. You can see here, just a brief description. They complex aero parts. They're repairing, manufacturing, engineering advanced aerospace structures, fabrications. So it just talks about a brief description of what they do there. So as I kind of indicated, some of the things that they've developed here at this property. Turn to page 30. This is just some permits that they were taking out just over the years, like this, just to show that they've, there's some alterations they've been taking out. So they are maintaining the building. The building has been maintained over the years. Just some further permits, some structural alteration permits, interior alteration permits. And there's just some few other permits here from 2016 and 2012, just again talking about some more interior alterations and such. So, and then lastly on page 34, this is just some vacancy report, which I'm not really going to go into, but overall, so yeah, just kind of showing what this building is and the condition, the quality of the building. So obviously being a newer building, it is of good condition and quality and what they're doing there. So I believe that concludes my presentation, and I would be open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions on the assessor's presentation?
I do indeed, sir. Thank you. Mr. Harling, have you visited this property?
I've not inspected physically, but I have exterior inspection.
Okay. All right. And I just want to be very clear. You've mentioned Magellan and what goes on there, but we're not assessing the going concern or the business value of the tenant. We're rather looking at the bricks and mortar. We're fee simple interest in the real estate, the built asset, correct?
Oh yeah, I'm mindful of that, but I think I've shown some photos of the quality of the building, so, but
Well, you've shown a lot of the equipment, but that's not what we're assessing here today, correct?
no, I know, but I mean, you can see pictures of the actual building itself too.
Right. Yeah. No issue with quality. I just want to make sure we're not commingling.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. 100%. I totally agree with you. Yes. No, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, first page, we have 36-foot wall heights. Now, would you agree with me that as a general comment in the Winnipeg industrial market, the 36-foot wall heights would generally be considered super adequate to most users' needs?
You know, I don't know if it would be super adequate. I mean, they are higher than typical you would see, but you know, I don't think you're right. It's not as common. You wouldn't see as many buildings of that high wall. Yes, I'll disagree. I'll agree with that. So,
okay. Would that lead to higher costs, higher expenses in this building typically?
Yes, I mean, potentially, yeah. Potentially, yeah. I don't have the exact figures, but yeah.
And is this, I should have asked you this first, is this whole assessment model derived?
Oh, correct. Yes, it is model derived.
It's all model derived. Okay. And so the model for example, when we look at the shortfall, is that adjusted when we have super adequate elements, or is it treated as though it were typical of market?
You know, I don't have that information at the moment, so I really can't speak to that. So,
okay. Can we agree that a land to plan area of only 1.9 is very low?
It is low.
For new, yeah.
I mean, yeah, you know, I'm not gonna, I could go into more, but yeah, I'll just say it is a bit lower, yes. So,
yeah. Okay. And would you agree then, if we can agree that 1.9 is low, that we would typically expect in our market somewhere between 3 to 4 to 1? That would be anywhere from ideal to good would be 3 to 4 to 1. Is that fair comment?
That would be a good land to plan ratio, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Does the model capture? Does it make adjustments anywhere in this workup when we have these atypical features, such as these very high wall heights, or these very low land to plan ratios? Does the model?
I'm just going to say anything with the model. I don't really have any information on that, so I'm just kind of I don't have any information on that. So. Okay,
but it is all model derived. So
it is model derived. Correct.
Okay, so I have to ask you about it, but I appreciate that if you can't answer, that's fine. Now, I'm on page 13 of your brief. So the city has, or the model, I suppose, has classified this as MWL, so industrial manufacturing building.
Correct.
And presumably all of the inputs flow from, partially at least, from that classification, correct?
Yeah, it would be classified as manufacturing house. Yes, yes.
Okay. Now that shortfall, did you calculate the actual shortfall based on the submission in the INEs?
I did not look at the shortfall for the particular. No, I did not go into that. No.
Okay. I guess just mathematically, if we look at the total expenses being recorded, they're $18.56 a foot. Are you aware of that?
I did not go through the expenses, no. So
can we agree that would be exceptionally high?
That would be a little bit higher. Yes, I don't dispute that.
Okay. Well, the model uses $4 per foot, so $18.56 would be substantially higher, right?
You have? Would you be able to provide me the exact how you calculate it out? I guess just maybe I can see that. So
yeah, it's a simple calculation of the expenses.
No, I know how to do the calculation. So, I just you can show me.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So okay, if we go to the INEs and we look at the expenses that they've recorded, I think it's 2.2 million. Sorry, I have it here.
Okay. Give us the page number too, Mr.
Yes,
Story.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. To find it in your brief. Okay. Page 17 of the assessor's brief.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Total expenses. Oh, sorry, I said 2 million. It's 2,571,217. And then we simply divide that by the leasable area. And that gives us 1856 per foot, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Okay. So we can agree that is substantially above the norm of $4 per foot, correct?
Yes, correct. Yes. Yep.
Okay. And this building has a mezzanine in it. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, it's a very small portion of mezzanine, I believe, correct? Yes.
It is indeed. Have you applied the same rental rate to the mezzanine as you have to the main floor? Is it all blended? How is that treated?
Yeah, it's all blended essentially. Yeah. So.
Okay. And you'd mentioned, well, okay, I'll go through your rents just very quickly. We're not worlds apart on the rent, but I just want to ask a couple of questions, if I may. Page 14, Mr. Chair. Mr. Harling, your first input on debates. Can you tell us the land to building, the land to plan ratio of that property?
Don't have that at the moment. If you give me a moment, I could look that up though.
Sure.
It's This is, let's see, 74. They want 59. I think it's roughly 2.14.
Okay, so it is slightly higher than our subject. That's fine. And then, sorry, I think you said input number 3 was, that's a retail rent. Is that correct?
It's not retail, but it is being used for a parts store. Yes, I'm mindful of that.
Okay, so but the parts store would be, that would have a retail component, so like a Napa Auto Parts kind of thing where you go in and.
Oh yeah, it would have some. Oh, for sure. Yes, yeah.
Okay, okay, and then Haggart. Now I've inspected that building. Have you ever inspected that building?
80 Haggard.
Yes.
Yes, actually, I have actually been in that building prior. Yes, actually.
Oh, okay. So can we agree that that is very unique, and that rent, let's say, has a lot of amortization in it. It's a built-to-suit rent. Is that fair?
You know what? The thing is, it's obviously significantly higher. So I'm mindful of that, and I know it's McKesson, Canacorp's in there, so they do with like pharmaceuticals and health stuff, health things. So yes, I'm mindful of that, but we're not even near that rent. But yes, I'm mindful of that situation.
Okay.
That rent.
Okay, just to be clear. And then obviously the Amazon warehouse, that's another rent that was, well, there's substantial work that went into that building. Can you agree with me to get Amazon in there on Regent? Is that a fair comment?
Oh yeah. But I don't believe the subject is much different in quality. But yes, there was a lot of work done to that building. Oh, yes. So.
Yep. And 1-year leases, just as a general comment, would typically generate higher rents per foot as opposed to a more typical longer term 10 or 15-year lease.
Yeah, longer term lease, there would be some adjustments in the rent. Yeah.
Okay, and same question for 195 Haggard. That's a short lease as well.
Obviously a bit longer, 3 years. But I've inspected that building too. It's that's what that building basically is, just a big shell warehouse, if anything. But yes, but I agree with you on that. So
okay. Thank you for that. And then if I go to your page 15, now the city has not provided any sales in terms of support material as to how the capitalization rates were derived by the model for this cycle. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, we're not sure supplying any actual specific cap rates, no. So
okay, so if we are to rely on the table that you're showing here, our subject property is, despite some of these super adequate issues or with the ceiling heights, and then the inadequate issues with the land to plan, you're showing a cap rate, or the model is showing a cap rate that is superior to the 20th percentile, and substantially below the lowest cap rate provided by brokers. So can you explain to us why this property, and I don't disagree that it's high quality, but why would it be, for example, 75 to 100 basis points lower than the lowest input by the brokers?
Well, I think as you kind of already spoke to it, I think, there are going to be cap rates that fall outside the, I say we do have the 20th to 8th percentile. So yes, 20 to 80% of properties fall within that range, but there are properties that would be, we would have apply higher cap rates based on its age, condition, quality, and that goes in the sense of a better building. So in this case, again, based on the quality of the building, the location being, in Ellis, close to the airport, the wall heights. Yes, I understand you said the wall heights, you believe they're super adequacy, but I just think based on the age, size, quality, condition of the building, those would be some factors that would derive the cap rate as well. So we have to look at everything. So
right. Okay. So, but I'm not sure if you were able to answer it, but the cap rate that's being generated is it. So you're saying that it is indeed capturing the quality of the building, but it's not capturing the very high expenses, the land to building ratio, or the potential super adequacy of those very high wall heights. Is that what I'm hearing?
It looks, it's taking into account it looks at everything, and I'm mindful of the fact of the lower land to plan ratio and those factors. But at the end of the day, I'm just, we look at it in terms of the condition, the quality. So I'm going to keep it at that. So
right, but again, and just finally, Mr. Chair, there's been no adjustment. This is simply the work of the model, and it's been sent out without adjustment by a person, an assessor at the department, correct? So there was no overrides to the model's initial output, correct?
Oh, no, there's nothing adjusted, no.
Okay, and I think I will leave it there. Oh, well, one last point, because you mentioned the permits. These permits are not, this is for a, well, okay, this is not for any adjustment or amelioration to the building that would not have been caught in the last couple of assessment cycles, correct? So this is not new.
Oh, no, I'm just trying to show that they've been maintaining and keeping the building. So yeah.
Right. Okay. I think those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Harley.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
Yes. Looking at your comps, are any of those comps in the aerospace industry?
I do not believe so. There are very few comparables out there on the aerospace industry. I believe there is one, but I don't have it in my comparable. But no, there's not a lot of comparables out there. And again, you're looking at bigger buildings. Yeah, there's just not a lot of comps out there. So
Yeah, and the applicant has touched on the quality of the building and the cleanliness of the building. It's been really well maintained by the appearance of your photos. Is that correct?
yes, correct. Yeah.
And I think by virtue of the industry it's in, which is making parts for planes, that would be a requirement of their contract, I'm sure. I don't know if you know that or not, but
Yeah, like I mean, they have like a clean room and things of that nature. They
Yeah.
have to, they're dealing with some sophisticated parts. So yeah.
lots of electronic equipment to manufacture with. It's not your typical looking manufacturing building if you think of grease and dirt and dust and smoke, etc. Is it?
Yeah, it wouldn't be like a basic, yeah, like you're comparing to like a typical older manufacturing warehouse. Yeah.
Okay. And did those factors all affect your cap rate, do you think, or is that not a factor?
In terms of like being compared to like older manufacturing warehouses, you mean? Or?
Well, not even older, just general manufacturing facilities.
I mean, it's really, we're looking at it based on, again, those particular specific factors. I can't speak to if they would be specifically put into there. So no, I mean, if we're looking at so.
Things like location aren't a factor in this case. We have some locations on Ellis Street that would be seen as less desirable than this one, but that doesn't seem to be a factor in your evidence.
No, location would be definitely a factor. Like I said, being located, for example, like on Ellis, being located close to like factors like the airport, things like that, that would definitely be a benefit. So yeah, but it does take into a factor. Location, though, yeah, location would be a factor.
It's a positive factor.
Yes, correct. Yes,
that's
yeah.
where it is. Okay. No, I'll leave it there. Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So Magellan owns this building, correct?
Correct.
And they're also the tenant.
Yes, it's owner occupied.
So Bristol Aerospace Limited is showing as a tenant, excuse me, on page 18. That's just another name for their company, or?
Yeah, I believe it's just a different way they call it. I looked into this, yeah. So yeah, but Magellan Aerospace, because you can look on the mailer 17, they're the owner. Yeah, it's owner occupied though, yeah. So because you look on the mailer on page 17, it says fully occupied. They say gross rent, but yeah, there's no rent in place.
Okay, I'm gonna go to income and expense mailer. Can you help me out where that was?
Page 17.
You got a lot of pictures in this.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, don't apologize for it. I like that. It's harder to find things. Okay, so they didn't put any revenue in there, obviously, because they're not getting any.
Correct, yeah.
So this would be all of their expenses to just operate this this building, correct?
Correct, would be the operating expenses, yeah.
Okay. So the shortfall that was discussed earlier on your model, that's based on a kind of a theoretical, because, well, this is an owner occupied, and generally probably don't have any vacancy in there, but anyways, you've allowed a 4.5% vacancy. So the shortfall that was discussed earlier, that's based on a vacancy, isn't that
Yeah, shortfall will be the
correct?
cost to cover vacancy, correct? Yeah.
So then would you call all of the expenses also shortfall because you don't have a tenant in here, or why are the terms defined differently here in your discussion with Mr. Story?
I believe just Mr. Story's position was he believes the shortfall would be higher just based on the expenses. I think that's kind of his position on it, though. So, like, I mean, we are the shortfall we apply. We're applying, since we're doing mass appraisal, we apply that shortfall to all industrial properties. So, I understand there's going to be some differences in site specific, but we're looking at a mass appraisal situation here. Hence, why we're using a slightly different, a lower shortfall, if you will.
Comparables. And if you can help me out where they are.
That would be on page 14.
So 80 Haggard got a 32-foot high wall, so kind of similar to the subject. Same with 195 Haggard, as in 38, it's even bigger. And they're actually pretty kind of in the same category in terms of size. They're very large. I'm just wondering, or this is kind of an oddity or anomaly, if you will, why one is 1654 and one is 955? Why the big difference in the rent? Do you have any idea or comment on it?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Story kind of alluded to it, but yeah, the 80 Haggard Avenue one, the business that's operating in there is called McKesson Canada Corp, and they're like essentially a pharmaceutical and health company. They make technology and medical equipment supplies. So they're a bit. It's a very it is a very one-off sophisticated building. So, and what they're doing there, so so those would be some of the factors of why it would be such a higher rent.
So did you disregard that then when you evaluated what the model was producing for a rent?
In terms of like when it was deriving rent for the subject, you mean? Like
Yeah.
Like I said, when we I mean, not really going too much, but we look at the model would derive. We're looking at comparables of similar size buildings, age, quality, wall heights, all those factors. So those would be factors that would take into account. We're not just going to say, oh, well, this building's close, we're going to use a $16 rent. So there's other factors that would be going to play as well. Land to plan ratio, and there's a bunch of factors that would go into it. So, and it is newer at 2021, when it was effectively built. So,
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. So, Mr. Story, you can begin your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay, so we're at 1855 Ellis. Now we've established that this is indeed part of what I'm going to call broadly the Magellan campus. And that comprises of three distinct roles, though they are adjoined effectively. So they're all in one big area, and that's 1855 Ellis, 1800 Sargent, 660 Barry. So it's enormous. It's one of the largest single tenant industrial complexes in the city. The role that we're dealing with presently is 1855. This is a new building built in 2012. It is a high quality building where aerospace engineering goes on. To be certain, we're not discounting that. What we're particularly concerned with today is the increase in value based on the cap rate. The cap rate is a major factor that we're contesting here today, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So again, it was built in 2012. Plan area is 137,095. Gross floor area is 138,564. So our first point of concern, Mr. Chair, is when we see a building that's single tenant in the industrial market, single tenant over 100,000 square feet, we will adjust our cap rate upward. There's a great deal of risk. And you pointed out something that's quite correct. We're either going to have zero vacancy or 100% vacancy. So that's why the the stabilized vacancy of 4.5 is applied in this case. We've both applied it. But when we see spaces that are over 100,000 square feet, single tenant in industrial, that factors into our cap rate selection. We also have to be concerned with this land to plan ratio. We have it here as 1.9, but I believe it is indeed 1.68. That is exceptionally low, particularly for a new building. You're going to find today that these Magellan properties, well, we've resolved one of them, but the two that remain, and the one that was resolved, have very, very low land to plan. That has to be considered. So we are indeed considering that it's a newer building, that it is of very high quality. So we're considering the good, but we also have to consider the factors that may detract from value from a market perspective. So those are the two big ones. Ultimately, our rents are not miles apart. On page 11, you can see the rental indicators that I've included. Now, I asked Mr. Harling about the mezzanine, and there's a very specific reason for that. In the market, we do not typically see additional rent being charged for mezzanine space. It's typically included in the what I'll call the main floor rent. The appraisal standard and certainly the BOMA standard tells us that we have to assess what is there. So our typical practice is to apply a half rent to any mezzanine space. Now, it doesn't have a huge bearing in this instance, but I want to make sure that you're aware that we're being very granular in our approach. So our main floor rent is $9.50, and I don't know that will be in dispute. Our mezzanine space then, of course, is half of that at $4.75, and that's our typical best practice. That leads us to an indicated market rent per annum of $1,309,380. I've provided you with 8 rental comps. Now, Mr. Whitbread had asked if anybody or any of these rental comps or any of the rental comps from the assessors data set were involved in aerospace engineering, and they weren't. We have one with a history of being an aerospace manufacturing facility, and that's on Redwood. That's 1345 Redwood. That was Boeing. It is now MacDon, but it does have the capacity to fulfill that aerospace engineering manufacturing function. So that is included. I've identified that as my best comparable. It's at $7. It is a little bit older. Proximity to the airport for the operator would be a benefit, but I want to be very careful because we have to decant the business value from the realty value. Be careful not to commingle those two things. So to an operator in the aerospace sector, proximity to the airport is a huge benefit. Clearly, I'm not suggesting that it's a negative for anyone else, but there may be a premium applied in that regard. So we want to be very, very careful about that, and we want to be very careful that we're not commingling what is done there and the different high-tech machinery that they use. Rather, we're simply talking about the building. Okay, so my rents average $8.92 with a median of $8.50. I noticed that 200 Beguine has been entered. The same entry was entered twice, so I've removed it here. So that average then adjusts to $8.98, and the median remains at $8.50. These buildings will have similar wall heights. They're similar in terms of their quality as a general comment, but they do have superior land to buildings. So we're not worlds apart on the rent, Mr. Chair, but we are trying to be as granular as possible. We're not using a model. We're doing this with our by hand, so to speak. So I suppose the largest part of the discrepancy is between the application of that main floor rent and then recognizing that that part of that rent should be applied to the mezzanine. Though, to be fair, in the eyes of the market, the mezzanine would not typically have a separate rent applied. Vacancy is not in dispute at $4.50. Now, the comp chart or the cap rate comp chart that was included in this brief and the others today was part of a working paper. That was an error. So I'll point you to my capitalization rate study, if you don't mind. I'll wait for you to have a chance to open it. Let me know when you have it. I can proceed.
I'm good.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
There.
Mr. Chair. Mr.
Yes.
Chair, could I implore the board a 5-minute recess just for personal reason?
Absolutely.
Sorry, Mr. Story.
Nope, no problem.
Okay, Mr. Mohan, we will recess then for 5 minutes.
Of course, I'll set that.
Okay, we are back in order. Mr. Story, if you can resume where you left off, please.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Okay, so I was just about to just, and I know that that everyone's heard this a number of times, so I'll hit the high points and sort of go through it expediently for the sake of for our time today, and I'll ask Mr. Chair that these comments carry forward to the balance of the brief. So I will touch on many of these issues that are illustrated in our cap rate study. So Altus Group has provided the board and the assessor with a full industrial capitalization rate study. So to be very clear, we do not use a model or any such thing. We review each property individually. We review the site-specific attributes, and we apply a cap rate that we believe to be appropriate and supported by market activity. So we've provided you with our full capitalization rate study. And we talk about some of the issues that I've been mentioning today already, the large size. So we make an adjustment to our baseline cap rates for properties that are single tenant industrial over 100,000 square feet. And then we consider an adjustment for properties where the land to plan is sub 3-to-1. And we will certainly make an adjustment when the land to building ratio is sub 2-to-1. And that is the case. Both of those issues are the case here. We have generally applied a shortfall rate of $4 per foot, as the assessor has, but if those expenses are running extremely high, as they are in this property in subject, we should consider that in our analysis as well. So we've provided you with a number of sales. To be quite frank with you, none of these are going to have any direct application as direct comparables, but rather they are presented in support of our conclusions, or they've driven our conclusions to where we believe the cap rates ought to be. We also consider our historic position on cap rates from cycle over cycle. We review the brokers' reports, and we check for compression to the cap rates. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that this is a Class A industrial building, despite its issues regarding the super adequacy of those very, very high wall heights. That's not typical in our market. That will lead to higher heating and cooling expenses in a very practical manner, as you can imagine. And of course, that land to plan ratio. So it is a Class A building. We do see that the general cap rate range for Class A industrial in our market, as of the reference date, should be between 6% and 6.5%. And that's summarized in our cap rate study. So I don't disagree that you might apply something like I'm sorry. Class A is 5.5 to 6.25. Class B is 6.5 to 7.25, and then non-investment is 8+. I was looking at the previous conclusion. So once again, that is in support of, or that is indicative of the compression in the market from April 1, 2021 to April 1, 2023. The higher end properties would see more compression. The lower end properties, the properties with the higher cap rates, would see less compression. That's what we're seeing. So based on investment grade A properties with cap rates ranging between 5.5 and 6.25, and with all of the site-specific attributes taken into account, we have applied a cap rate of 6% on this property. Again, we are careful to not commingle the business value or the equipment or what goes on in this building, but rather we're looking at it as an industrial building in the eyes of the market, and it is a very high quality. It is not a storage warehouse that's much older or some such thing. It is a high quality facility. However, we do have to recognize the good with the bad. So I think that we've been very fair in applying a cap rate of 6% to this property, especially when we consider, again, very high expenses, very high wall heights that may not have utility for other users in the market, for a wide swath of users in our market, and that very, very low land to building. And of course, that land to building ratio would prohibit future expansion. That's one of the major issues. And then for some users, if they require access and egress and turning radiuses for trucking and loading, that's where land to building becomes an issue. But further expansion is obviously the big issue. So we have applied a cap rate of no less than 6%. So if I flip back to my chief evidence, we have our income summary. This is page 23. You can see that our potential net market income of $1,240,466, which again is based on $950 a foot on the main floor and a half rent for the mezzanine, as per usual. Vacancy at 4.5% is typical in this area, and I don't believe it's under dispute. We do apply that typical 4% or $4 per foot shortfall, though I would caution that would likely be higher in the eyes of the market. A simple calculation can show you that the expenses are running over $18 a foot. So that has to be captured somewhere. I don't believe the model has done that, especially with the application of a 5% cap rate. So we have applied, again, our 6% cap rate to an NOI of $1,117,928, leading us to an indicated market value as of the reference date of $18,632,139, which we then round to $18,632,000. Again, I've included the income and expense mailer that supports our comments regarding the high expenses in this property.
Mr. Story, can I
yes,
just interrupt you for just a second?
Yes.
You earlier in your presentation, you had made a correction on what you had considered to be your average rent. I think you put it up a few cents.
Yes, indeed. Yeah,
you
the average one.
Apply that into your summary here. It doesn't look like it to me.
No. I you know what? I caught it yesterday on review, so it was not changed in chief evidence, but it is that entry on Beguine. So that would be entry number 8. So if we remove that affects the average. So the average moves from 892 to 898, and the median remains at $8.50 based on those rental comps. We've applied a higher rent though, but those are there are some challenges Mr. Harlan rightly pointed out about finding appropriate rental comps, but we had that one in twice. I think it's because we looked at 2 sets of rents. So that's my error. But if we remove that, the average is 898, the median is 850. We are recognizing the quality of the building and using a rent of $9.50. That's quite high in terms of current industrial rents.
So if you use 898, doesn't your number change there, your PNMI?
Oh, yes, sir, but I did not use 898. I used 945.
945.
I used a higher rent. So, and that's based on $9.50 per foot for the main floor, which is 137,095. The mezzanine is 1,469. We use 475. So that leads to a potential rent of 1,309,380, which we then divide by 138,564, and that brings us to 945 per foot. So that is our rental application. And again, it's not too far off from the assessor, but we are recognizing the mezzanine space, and we've applied the rents that we're supporting the rent that we've applied based on the table. I will point out, since we're speaking about the rents, that one on Haggard that was very, very high at $16. That was a rent that was, and I had mentioned it was built to suit, and it was loaded with all sorts of inducements to get that tenant in. We've used it here, but we've tried to stabilize it at $11.78, which I think is still atypical and should not probably be considered. But despite the fact that our average is just a touch below $9, we've used $9.50 on the main floor. So that is the rent that we've used. The cap rate is the major issue in this case. We don't see anything that would indicate a 5% cap rate would be appropriate. And when we consider the very unique nature of this property, that would that would indicate that there would be a limited number of potential users for the property, and that would be tantamount to a higher risk profile. The cap rate, of course, is the numeric expression of risk. So if we have a property that's very, very unique and would only satisfy the required utility of a limited number of participants in our market, we have to consider that in the overall capitalization rate. If you're an owner and you own this building, there are very few folks who would drive that utility and would pay you that sort of rent. So we have to, if we are going to use a higher rent, we are going to use a lower shortfall, we have to capture the inherent risk in the cap rate. That's our perspective, and we're not we certainly haven't over adjusted. We've used 6%, which is effectively what we ought to use for a newer, good quality industrial building in the city of Winnipeg. So with all of that being said, my value comes to 18,632,000. And again, that is not modeled. That's done by analysis, and we would respectfully submit that the value not exceed 18,632,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Harling, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
I just have a couple. In terms of rent, like I agree with you, Mr. Story. I don't think we're too far apart, so I understand your positions on that mezzanine and all that. So. I'm not gonna. I don't think I'll have any questions on the rent there. So obviously, I know that our main issue of contention is the cap rate, obviously. So I understand you've provided your position on that. So I know you've alluded to the cap rate study and as well as the cap rates you provide on page 21. Like I know you said you were just kind of using these as support because obviously these cap rates or none of these cap rates would be comparable or similar to the subject property. I believe just based on some.
These cap rates would be more typical of typical industrial buildings, and that speaks further to the fact that this is a very, very unique building, and sometimes unique is not exactly a positive. It would indicate that there's a limited pool of end users for this property. So yes, your comments are, I agree.
So in the sense, like, just looking at obviously you provided the investment category statement, and I appreciate you, classifying as Class A. We acknowledge that. So obviously it ranges from 5.5 to 6.25. So, and I understand you've indicated you make adjustments based on different factors. So, how do you, maybe you could elaborate a bit. How do you, like, I understand how you make the adjustments in a sense, but, you're going from 5.5 to 6.25. Like, what would be, why would you not go, let's say 5.75, 5.85? Like, what
Sure.
how do you derive it? You can break it down.
That's a great question. So, so we talked a little bit about supply and demand, and it's interesting when we see very, very small buildings. Occasionally, the assessor or the model, I suppose, will apply a very, very low cap rate, and the justification that I typically hear is that there's a wide swath of potential users for that building, and we agree with that in concept or in theory, but we often don't agree on the actual cap rates that are applied. But in theory, that's fine. But that has to swing the other way as well. So when we have a property like this where we have a limited number of end users, we have to consider that. But how do we quantify the adjustments, I think is what you're asking. Why not a 5.75? Why not a 5.5? So when we look at something like a very small commercial condo, and that's a reasonably new entrant into our market to have these very small commercial condos that can be leased or purchased, typically purchased, those cap rates are generally lower, and that makes sense. That's an end user who's generally purchasing equity and getting out of a rental scenario. So those are, from my perspective anyway, those are lower risk. That would be your 5.5, your 5.75s. Now, if this property had 4 to 1 land to building, if the expenses were running more regularly, and if the wall heights were more typical of what we would expect to see in the market, so say something like 24 to 28 feet for a new building, then you would absolutely, I would be very comfortable at a 5.75 or some such thing. So I suppose what I would suggest to you, Mr. Harling, is my adjustment is a 1/4 point, which I think is very, very conservative, to account for the very, very low land to building. Again, sub 3 it would give us some pause. Sub 2 is a caution, and that has to be captured somewhere. When I see those expenses, I haven't adjusted upward. I have some questions about them, but I can't help but remark that they are running very high. And if I were a purchaser who was looking to acquire a building, that's information that's readily available to me that would factor into my consideration. So we can't simply take the positive aspects of the property and say, well, we're going to use the lowest available cap rate or the lowest cap rate in our market, but rather we have to take a holistic approach and look at all of the positives and the potential negatives together, and use our best judgment to apply a capitalization rate that is supported by the market. So in this case, there's a reasonable case to use well, frankly, a higher expense ratio. There's potentially a case to use a slightly lower vacancy rate, but ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, a 6 cap rate on this property, given some of the challenges, I think is very fair. So it is not based on an algorithm, and I'm not sure exactly how the model or the algorithmic how the mathematics work, where one cap rate is put out for one building and one's put out for the other, but we do this by hand. We use our own analysis, and so I suppose that it is a subjective adjustment, but I've tried to use a very light touch in adjusting upward from what I would call a 5.75, and there's a good case for a 6.25. But on balance and on review of this property, I think 6% makes good sense, and that's what we applied for those reasons.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Just another quick question is on, I guess it'd be, as I noticed, you provided the income expense mailer, but you provided the 2024 expense. I guess you provided the 2023 mailer, so I guess it's a little different than mine. So I provided the 2020, I think, 2 mailer, I believe I shown here. So
you're right. Yeah, no, you're quite right. So no, you're right. My apologies.
It's okay. No, I was just kind of curious.
My comments on the shortfall though were based on yours, so
that's fine.
We're okay there. Yeah.
So on page 17 of my brief, where the actual expenses are, I apologize, I didn't get a chance to really go into depth on these. So I guess just one expense I just wanted to ask you about. You know, the wages and benefits and caretaker, it's about $600,000. Does that seem kind of high to you? So
yeah, that's high. That is a high input. So if you take that out, you're still running very, very high. So we would, and you're quite right for pointing that out, but if we look at the property taxes, we also haven't used the business taxes. I didn't account for that. So those should be included. You're quite right. We can take out those wages and benefits for the caretaker, but those are still expenses running about $2 million a year. That's still quite high. So, and again, I'm not applying $18 or any such thing. I'm simply pointing out to you and the board that the expenses do run quite high. But you're right, that is an outlier that should be reviewed.
Okay. No, again, it's just something I just noticed, and
no, you're quite right.
You know, even the maintenance and repair, like it's $771,000. Like, I mean, just being a newer building, it just seems kind of high. Is there that much maintenance or repair they need to do on this building, of that, you know, newer building like that? So,
well, I suppose, and I guess this goes back to my comment about, no, I don't think that doesn't give me a great deal of pause. If we're talking about those rents, if we are to achieve those rents that are over $9 a foot for a building like this, I think that it effectively takes money to make money. So that doesn't give me a great deal of pause, but you're right, that would be high for a typical building. Yeah.
Okay. You know what? I think I'm just gonna leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
Yes, I just want to go back to the study. Bear with me. Page 18 of your capitalization study.
Yes, sir.
You've got a couple of numbers highlighted in sort of a pink color.
Yes.
Down at the bottom. Can you just explain to me what we've got here on the A and B? I think you said this is an A building.
It is indeed, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, what page are you on?
18 of the study.
Okay, thank you.
So what you did in the A is the study, you didn't do anything, the study did it. You dropped it from 6 to 5 on the low end and dropped it 6.5 to 6.25 on the high end. Is that correct?
So, right. So for context, cycle over cycle, um, we've looked, and this is preceding this conclusion, Mr. Redbread, you'll see the brokers reports, and I had mentioned that we actually track the compression to the cap rates cycle over cycle. So our analysis would indicate that the cap rate range in the previous cycle and let's just talk about a quality buildings, because that's what we're talking about today. For this property, the cap rates would range typically from 6% to 6.5.
Right.
In this cycle, we are seeing some compression, and the cap rates should now range from 5.5 to 6.25. So that is the compression cycle over cycle for the cap rates for A-class industrial. And that's supported by the brokers and the sales. Yeah.
Yeah, and in either case, your 6.0 rate fits in.
Mhm.
Is there any significance to this hearing on the highlighted pink areas below? On the
Oh, no, I believe that's just in our study. I'll edit that. That's likely just that's not for any to draw your attention to those or anything like that.
Okay.
That's yeah. No, it's a
I thought
huge
you would
study.
have
So
done
it's
that.
no, you caught our typo. We'll have that fixed.
No worries. Otherwise, I'm fine. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
You're muted, Linda.
Sorry. When you're discussing the shortfall, I mean, you've agreed to leave it at the $4 on the model. But you're also, when you're looking at the I&E divided by the leasable area, it's coming out to more of like an $18.64. Is there a reason why that you're leaving it at the $4?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So we could have, I suppose we could have adjusted it upward. I've chosen to try to capture the what I'm going to call the slightly elevated risk over and above the baseline in the capitalization rate. So as opposed to applying, and some of those very high expenses might have something to do with the operations. So without a really forensic dive into the expenses, it would be difficult to net out exactly what they ought to be. We do agree that as a general concept for this cycle, $4 per foot is what we would typically expect to see in a standard industrial building. These expenses run a little bit higher. I'm not suggesting that they ought to be. We wouldn't use the actuals without some adjustment downward, because shortfall is the cost of carrying vacant space. So as you know, so if the space was vacant, some of those expenses might be lower indeed. But all of that to say that the expenses do run higher, regardless of how you exclude certain inputs. They do run higher than $4 per foot. So I'm simply pointing out that we're starting with the premise that this is a very good Class A industrial building, and I agree with that. The issue that we have is we have a form of obsolescence called super adequacy, where we have these very, very high wall heights, which is not typical of the market. So sometimes a positive can be, it may seem counterintuitive, but sometimes something that seems very positive can be so unique that it doesn't confer extra value because of it does not have, there are not a wide swath of users in our market who would benefit from those very, very high wall heights. And in fact, it would just simply lead to higher expenses. And then, of course, the other major issue here that is undeniable is that sub 2 to 1 land to building. So I suppose to answer your question, we've adjusted our cap rate upwards slightly based on those three, what I'm going to call negative factors, but in the face of what I would say is a number of very positive factors. So we're trying to be balanced in our approach.
Okay, and one more question. I know the rent, you're not too far off from from the city.
Yep.
But the mezzanine area, is there, if you've seen the inside of the building, is it being used for anything right now?
Yeah, I think that I don't think it's a storage mezzanine. I think it's actually, they actually do work on it, but it's, the point is that this is always an issue that comes up. So our way to deal with this is to apply a half rent. In the eyes of the market, and to be fair, what we are attempting to do here is determine fair market value as to how the market would view this property. The market does not typically apply a separate rent for mezzanine space. If you look at leasing documents and requests, they don't say.
But they are using it currently.
They are using it, yes. So it is there. It is being used. In the eyes of the market, would not typically be applied any rental rate. But
Right.
to be fair and based on the BOMA standards, as the assessor has in the past has pointed out, we do have to assess what is there. So the way to, in my opinion, appropriately value that space is to apply a half rent. You'll occasionally see us do that for a second floor space that doesn't have elevator or some such thing. So that's a way to treat that space.
Is it included in the leasable area?
It is, yes.
All right.
It is.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's still something I'm not grasping here with your page 23, and maybe you're just gonna have to go slower for me, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
You said your rent was close. It was $9.45 a square foot, right? Is that what you said?
Yes. Sorry, let me just pull up my rent calculation. I think we used, yes. So if you go to my page 11, you can see how we've allocated. But yes, $9.50 per foot on the main floor, so higher than the comparables that we've presented in recognition of the fact that it is a high quality building. Those are very high rents for an industrial property generally. So page 11 shows you that the main floor of 137,095 feet has been applied a rate of $9.50. The mezzanine of 1,469 square feet, which is indeed included in the leasable area, has been applied a half rent of $475. So when we blend those two rents together, based on their contribution divided by the area, we come to $9.45. And that calculation again is on page 11.
Okay, and that gives you a total of 1,309,380, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so now if I go to page 23.
No, you're correct. I see the issue there. Yeah, no, that is my
Because,
error.
I'm getting a total of 19 million and a half and 500,000 or something.
Yeah, no, you're right. Sorry, let me just, apologies for that. Why not fix that for you? Okay. Thank you for catching that. Yes, okay. Oh, you're quite right. Okay, that changes our value. Okay, so that gets us now, apologies for that, 19,800,000, so 19.8. So that would be the actuals based on that adjusted rent. I believe we were using a lower rent to begin with in our working paper, and I had adjusted that. So yes, you're quite correct. Apologies again. So if we use 950 at 137.95 and 475 at 1,469, we get to 1,309,380, which is what's what appears on page 11. And then if we were to adjust that income summary on page 23, you're quite correct. That value then, using all of the same inputs, comes to $19,848, so 19.8 million. Thank you for that.
Have you got a new NOI there, Mr. Story?
Yes, indeed. New NOI would be 1,188,003.
Can you repeat that number again?
Yes, the new NOI is 1,188,003 and $3. So 1,188,003. And then 6 cap gets us to $19,848, which we then round to 19.8.
So you're still less on your NOI than the city then, by about 60,000.
Yes, and I think that's because we've captured the mezzanine, right? I don't know if the city has or how they've treated it, but yes, you're correct.
So you're slightly less on the rent there. Okay. I don't think I have any other questions. Anything in the summation, Mr. Harling?
I think we went into quite a bit of detail on it. Obviously we're aware of the condition and the quality of the building. I understand Mr. Story's concerns with the building and such, but at the end of the day, I believe this is still a very good quality building. I understand there are some adequacies in the sense of the wall height. I still think this building, the way it's situated and the way it is, I don't think it's to say that nobody could. It's not like a building that could not be used by anybody. I think there are other property, other people that could, or businesses that could use this building. I understand there are some adequacies, maybe the higher wall height they may not need, and yes, that would obviously contain some higher expenses, but. I don't believe this building essentially is saying it's like a one-off and nobody could use it. But overall, yes, I think it's a good quality building though. So, and it's a good location. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And just very quickly in summation, Mr. Chair, I'm certainly not suggesting that that it's a one-off or that that only these folks could use it. I'm suggesting that there would be a limited or a more limited pool of end users than would be typical of a what we'll call a regular industrial building. I'm going to suggest to you that the 5% cap rate is very aggressive, and it does not appear to capture the concerns we have about the adequacies, the super adequacies in terms of the wall height. It does not capture the very, very low land to building and those higher expenses. So I think the value that the revised value now that we've put forth to you is very fair, and that 5% cap rate is simply too aggressive on a site-specific view of the property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That will then conclude this property, item number 1855 Ellis. And we can then proceed to item number 660 Barry. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Mr. Harling, if you may begin your presentation.
Thanks, Chairman. The file number is 24-2210. The roll number is 07569086800. The address is 660 Berry Street, and the owner is Magellan Aerospace Limited. 2025 roll year based on a reference date of April 1st, 2023 is $22,950,000. If we look below on page 1 of my brief on the property description, we'll see this is there are a number of 8 buildings on the roll. The actual years built range from 1940 to 1989, which is similar to the effective year builds, 1940 to 1989. The wall heights are 10 to 25 feet. The land area is 694,851 square feet with a plan area of 413,881 square feet, which gives us a land plan area of 1.68 and an overall leasable area of 487,728 square feet. Turn to page 2 of my brief. We'll see the request for income information have been received. There are no recent sales and there are no subject leases in place. Okay, so this could probably go a bit quicker in this portioning. So this property is actually just adjacent to the previous property at 1855 Ellis. It's just literally just east of it, just literally beside it. So it is technically on Berry Street, but it's also facing Ellis as well. If we turn to page 4 of my brief, you'll just see kind of a overall overhead view of the property. It's kind of hard to tell the overall shape of it, but if we go to page 5 of my brief, this gives you a better idea of the parcels. You can see, as you indicated, it's just adjacent to the previous property we're speaking to, also owned by Magellan and used by Magellan Aerospace. If we turn to page 6 of my brief, this gives you more of a zoomed in image. So you can kind of see here, there's a number of buildings on here, as you can see here. So there's buildings at the facing Ellison, there's some buildings facing closer to Sargent, and then on Berry Street here. So there's a number of buildings here, henceforth the very large leasable area, which we've indicated, or I've indicated in the page 7. This just gives you more further zoomed in photos. You can kind of just again see more of the buildings that are situated here, how they're placed. So, as Mr. Story alluded, this is definitely one of the most probably bigger properties out there that we have in the city. So this is just, it's a number of buildings and it's a very large parcel of land and a large amount of buildings. Continue to page 8. This is just some further photos, just trying to show different angles of the property, just to get some idea of the shape, the buildings themselves. So the top of page 8, this is facing on Ellis, and the bottom page 8, you can see Barry's just adjacent there. And this is continued on page 9, again, just showing some further photos. And if we go to page 10, this is just some street view photos. This is just going down Barry Street towards Sargent. So you can kind of see some of the pictures of the buildings that I was able to get pictures of are from a street view. And this is continued on page 11, just some further photos of the buildings on the outside of the property. So yeah, so this just gives you an idea of the business or the property, some of the buildings on the property. Okay, so if we turn to page 12, my brief, see the income workup. So we can see here the total leasable area is 487,728 square feet. We're applying a rent of $3.75 a square foot, which gives us a potential rent of $1,828,980. We were allowing 4.5% for vacancy, which gives us a total, which gives us an effective gross income of $1,746,676. Allowing 3% for non-public expenses, as well as $4 a square foot for shortfall to costly cover vacancy, which then gives us a net operating income of $1,606,485. And then lastly, we were applying an overall capitalization rate of 7%, which gives us an estimated value of $22,950,000. And now if we turn to page 13 of my brief, we'll see some of the rent comparables I've shown here. So first things first, I just wanted to make a comment. Comparable number 4, 861 McLeod. I was provided some information that that's not a good lease, or it's not a market lease. So I'm not going to be putting any weight on that, and I just asked the board to disclose that, so I won't be speaking to it. But in terms of the other comparables, so comparable number 1 here, I'll just kind of give a brief description. The board can look at more in depth. So the first one's located on Sargent Avenue. Comparable 2 is located on Saskatchewan Avenue. Comparable 3 is on Keewatin Street. Comparable number 5 is on Fife. Then we have Redwood and Hutchings. For example, like I know Mr. Story had mentioned, 1345 Redwood. This is the Boeing. Boeing used to use the space at one point. Obviously, it's being used by Macdon now, but this was used for an aerospace type property before. So now the comparables, they range in leasable start dates from July 2019 to May 1st, 2021. Lease terms range from 4 to 18 years. The leasable areas range from 90,257 square feet to 147,669. So the wall heights are 17 to 26 feet. Figure bills range from 1968 and 1990, and the net rents range from $4.16 to $7. So now, mindful, obviously the subject property, the leasable areas, it's significantly larger than any of these comparables. So obviously there are no lease comparables out there of this size. So I'm very mindful of that. So some of these leases were obviously much higher. So, when you look at a factor of economies of scale, of course, a much larger building would have a much lower rent just based on, trying to find a tenant that could actually lease that much space out. So I'm mindful of that, but I can just tell you, there's definitely no lease comparables of that size out there. And obviously there's some of the buildings here, you can see they were built in different stages as all the way back to 1940. So there is some older buildings here as well, up to 1989. So I'm mindful of that. You could argue that there is some piecemeal in the sense it was built at different stages and such. So I'm very mindful of that. Again, we're using a 375 rent, so obviously lower than the comparables, but I'm mindful of that. Another factor that is I just like to mention is I guess I could mention there is I believe some mezzanine space in here as well. I don't have it broken down, but I'm sure Mr. Story will speak to that. So, but just something I wanted to point out. So turn to page 14, I brief. Cap rate information. So we've applied a 7% cap rate. Obviously, this being a much larger building, compared to the previous property, I believe a higher cap rate would be appropriate just based on its size, condition. Again, the low land to plan ratio of those factors. So looking at the outside sources, we're applying a 7%. I believe it does fall within our 20th to 80th percentile. Some of the outside sources, it would fall within the range they've indicated as well. So I believe there would be some more further support potentially for that cap rate at 7%. I'm mindful of the fact of some of the factors of being, bigger building, much larger, and some other factors. I'm sure Mr. Story will speak to that, but so I believe the cap rate does be supported by the outside sources, though. Page 15, my brief is just some Municipal Assessment Act excerpt information. Page 16, my brief is just the income and expense mailer that was provided. Again, like the previous property, owner occupied, so obviously there's no leases in place. Similar to the previous property, I'm sure this will be mentioned, but the expenses are a little bit higher too. I think they're very similar to the previous property. In some of the cases, there's some expenses I think that are maybe a bit higher in some cases, but I'm not gonna really go into too much depth on that because I think we already discussed that with the previous property. Same type of property being used, same business, right? Or the same owners using it, right? So I understand some of the, the factors that would be taking place to maintain a building of this size. Page 18, my brief. This is just a photo. This is just a particular area that there's like, I'm not trying to say this is the entire building how it looks. This is just a particular area of a clean room that they developed for some satellite, building some satellites or some satellite components for in the building. So here's just an article on page 19, just speaking about that. Then they built this building. Again, it's not a very large space, but page 20, here's just some further photos of that particular area. Page 21 is just information talking about that facility I was mentioning, this clean room that they were developing, this advanced satellite integration facility. Let's continue on page 22, just talking about this particular facility that they're building in here to develop. And page 23 is just another further article just talking about this clean room. Again, it's not a very large space. I'm mindful of that, but just going to show that they are developing some sophisticated things here. And I understand we're not looking at business value here, and I'm mindful of that. So I'm just speaking to this information about it. Page 25, my brief is just some permits. Just speaking about some development permits, the ongoing development of this facility, so they are upkeeping it. Page 27, my brief. This is just a floor plan. So this is that particular room I was just mentioning, but the clean room they built. I am very mindful of the size, obviously, when compared to the rest of the building. Unfortunately, I have not inspected this building. I believe it would be a good building to inspect to really get an idea, but unfortunately, we don't have time to do that. Page 28 and 29 are just some further photos of some floor plans we had on file. Again, some of these are probably older. But yeah, just to kind of show you just some basic information about the floor plan or the overall shape of the property. So, and then page 30 in my brief is just some vacancy report information, which I don't think I'm going to go into. So that being said, I believe that'll conclude my presentation, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Story, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
I have a few, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Harling, similar to the previous workup, is this all model derived? This is all done by a model?
Yes, everything on this docket is model derived. So yeah, we can do that going forward. But
okay, okay, and then no review was done before it was. And the reason I asked, Mr. Harling, is I know in the past there was a percentage review. I've been told by assessors there's a percentage review when the new assessments are made before they go out to ensure that the increases are not exorbitant. Was that done for this property?
I'd have to look into the notes. I don't have that information on hand. I apologize. So, but yes, I'm mindful that we do look into it. But yeah, so yeah, but I don't have that information at the moment. I apologize. So,
okay. All right. And sorry, you mentioned that that new space, but that would be less than 1% of this building, right? So
yeah, as I
very,
indicated,
very small.
It's not a very significant space. Yes. So.
Right. Okay. And now this building, sorry, did you say you visited? I know you didn't inspect it, but have you visited it?
I've done like a kind of a walk around of like the exterior, but unfortunately I've never been in it. I actually do know some people that have actually worked there previously, but unfortunately I've never seen it in person. No, so physically inside. Yeah.
Right. And can we agree though that now one of the properties that was resolved on this docket, 1800 Sargent, is it forms effectively a single economic unit. It's attached by an underground tunnel. Are you aware of that?
No, I have not been in there, so I could not. I wasn't aware of that. So
okay. Superficially, though, the parking that is required for this building, there's a north parking lot and a south parking lot. Correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, and so the individual role that we're dealing with today, part of the parking requirement is satisfied by a separate role. Correct?
I believe it is on a separate role. Correct. Yeah.
Okay, and does the model? Is there any way? I know that's a very. I know the model typically, I assume, would deal with binary sort of issues, but something granular like that, would the model have any way of adjusting or capturing that in the assessment of the subject?
You know what? I don't have that information, so I can't really speak to it. Sorry.
Okay, and okay, on your first page here, actual year built 1940 to 1989. Can we agree that the portion that was built in 1989 was 4,200 feet?
you give me a moment, let me just verify that. I actually have up the building. I just want to double check. Yes, correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that
the majority of the
that's
building is older. Yes, I think effective year built overall would be about 1952, I believe. So
right. So the city's applied 1952, but let's say 80, I think it's 81 or 83% of this building was built in 1940, correct?
the majority of the building is of an older, yes.
But 1940 though, right? Not just older, but 1940. Which is,
Well, again, yeah, I guess you're right. If you look at effective year built 52, but you're right, 1940, the majority of it, yes. Yeah.
right. Okay. And we have the same issue with land to plan in this with this property. We have a sub 2 land to plan. Is that fair?
It's a lower land plan, I'm sure, correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. Just move through this very quickly. All right. So I'm just looking at the, now you'd mentioned, oh, this is my big question here, because I noticed this yesterday. This is on your page 12. Why is it showing the premise as a retail warehouse as opposed to an industrial property?
You know, I did notice that. And when I actually was going through my brief, I noticed that. And I honestly have to look into that, why that is classified, because I'm very mindful of that. And I'm sure your question probably is, does that affect the model? So you know what, I'm not sure why that is the case. That'll be something I'll have to look at. I can't say for certain what would change. Obviously, being a larger space, you know, it's going to have a lower rent, so I'm mindful of that. But you know, I do apologize. I did notice that, so that's something I'll have to take into account, look at going forward, though. So I appreciate you know, just bringing that up, though. So.
And that was my next question. How does that affect the model? Because we are seeing, as you can tell, we're seeing a major, what I'll say is a pretty severe increase. Is that, so are you saying you don't know if that affects the model, or something to look into?
I mean, you're right. Retail warehouse. You know, I don't want to make speculations here. I'd have to go in to do some more further analysis on that. So.
Okay. And we don't have an issue with the leasable area. We don't have an issue with the shortfall in this scenario. We calculated it looks fine at 4. No adjustment there, although we do recognize that it's sharing expenses with that connected building. The mezzanine, again, can you give us a sense of what rent was applied to the first floor, what was applied to the second floor, and what was applied to the mezzanine? Or is it all simply a blended rate across the entirety of the property?
Yeah, correct. It is essentially a blended. Not essentially. It is a blended rate we're using for the entire space. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Page 13. Looking at these comps, and I appreciate McLeod that's owner occupied. Now, is 1835 Sargent your best comp?
You know, in terms of, you know, I think I don't like to one particular comparable. You know, in honesty, if I had to say the closest comp, I mean, are we talking in terms of condition and quality, or age, or building size? Or are we just talking in general sense here? I guess.
General sense based on all of the above, let's say.
You know what? In honesty, you know what? I know we alluded to this previously, but for example, like the one on, you know, Redwood would be the most, I think would be similar in the sense of being, because it was used for a similar type of business, or, you know, Boeing used that. So I don't think that one would be too unreasonable to say it's very comparable. Yeah,
we would need to adjust that based on the size, though, correct?
Oh yes, of course. Yes, like you said, economies of scale. Yes, I'm mindful of that. Yes.
Okay, and just, I mean, approximately, Sargent is right in that same stretch. That looks like a good lease, but that's, and again, you'd mentioned that Redwood is good, but you've got an effective year on that one of 1990, and ours is 1952, so that would require some adjustment as well.
Yeah, exactly. It is newer, and you're right. I'm mindful of the fact, the size, the age of the building. That would be some factors that would have to take into account as well. Yes.
And it also has I believe it's better than 3-to-1 land to building as well.
It does have a bit more. It does have some excess land that you could use. Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So to be fair, and I appreciate the difficulty of finding comps this size, but I think that just speaks to our cap question, which I'll ask you next. Again, this is a modeled cap rate. Can we agree that this property in our market and campus, and as it functions as a single economic unit, would be considered a fairly extreme outlier compared to most of the industrial stock in the city? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, there's, like I said, just due to the size of it, and like I said, that I guess you could argue campus structure. You're right. There's going to be very few, if any, cap rates that you could sales of cap rates that you could find for something of this size. Yeah. So
Yeah. So then should it not fall outside of those prescribed percentiles based on the unique nature on a site-specific review of the property?
you know, there could be some, you know, when you're looking at it as a whole perspective, yeah, I think there could be something you could look at to based on that account. You're right. I can't say what the sales that are used in some of these outside sources, but you know, it is I guess a guide, if you will, I guess. So, but you're right, because there's just no cap rate sales to support this build this size. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And then the permit, that's to be fair, that's a roof that they're building over a low-hanging older roof in order to negate issues with snow loading, correct?
I believe that is correct. Yes, the permit's there.
So that's upkeep. Okay. And in terms of the actual value based on the size of this property and the complex, it's that would be standard type of repair and maintenance item. It's fair to say. Is that
yeah, in terms of maintenance, yeah, obviously upkeeping, those would be some things that you would have to maintain for sure. Yeah. So
right. Okay. I think those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions? Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Just when I look at the pictures on page 7, at 660, it looks like this is all owner occupied, right? So the 487,728 square feet is all owner occupied by the same company as 1855 Ellis. Are
correct.
they all individual buildings, or so could it be at some point where you could lease these out to separate entities?
I mean, the way it's, you know, it's on one roll, so I mean, I guess it is possible. I don't ever foresee that would happening. Obviously, it's, you know, they're not. I can't imagine Magellan would ever get rid of this, or you know, if they did, they'd sell it to maybe another business that could use it, like another aerospace company. But you know, I mean, I guess it's possible, but I don't foresee it personally. So, but
All right, no, that's all I had. No further questions.
Okay, I don't have any other.
May I ask one, please? I was just counting, and I can't
sure.
reconcile the photo on page 7. And it may not be a big thing, Mr. Harling, but I think your evidence tells us 8 buildings. I seem to see a heck of a lot more than 8 buildings on this diagram.
Yeah, you know what? When you look at it, it depends on how you like, because you see, as you can see, there's a number of like I said, unfortunately, I have not inspected it personally, so I can't really speak to that. But you're right. I'd have to go back in our system because, like, again, being an older building, there may be something that needs to be updated in terms of the amount. But you're right. When you look at it, like for example, the bottom of page 7, where it shows an L, like there's 2 buildings there, right? And then you start counting all these individual buildings. And you're right. I see what you're saying. If you count kind of like at the top there, where it's a 60, you could count like 7 or 8 buildings right there in a sense, right? Yeah. So it really depends on how they're fixed, I guess. So I'd have to look further into depth on how we.
I'll leave that with you. Yeah. I'll leave that with you. No, I have no other questions then.
Okay. Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so 660 Barry, Mr. Whitbread, you made a comment about the number of buildings. This is treated as one building because they are all indeed attached, and they are also attached to, as I mentioned, 1800 Sargent by underground tunnel. So it's a good comment, but it's effectively a building that was built in 1940 and then has had piecemeal addition throughout over the years. So it's again very unique. That's going to be the word of the day on some of these Magellan properties. So and to that point, if you go to my page 8, I'll show you the different buildings, what we're calling the different buildings, but they're really just the expansions or the piecemeal construction. You can see I'd said between 81 and 83, it's 83.17% of this building, of this property, was built in 1940. So over 80 years ago. Metal frame, there's an addition of 3,000 feet, which would be considered nominal. Masonry, that's built in 1964. And then the second last addition is 49,000 feet in 1975. And then finally, a metal frame building of 4,200 feet in 1989. So I think it's somewhat erroneous to suggest that, The building was built between 1940 and 1989, but I would place an asterisk there and mention that the building, the addition that was added in 1989 is only 4,200 feet. We have almost 500,000 square feet in this building. So this is an enormous single tenant industrial property in our market, completely atypical. Ms. Schultz, he'd asked if these would be separately demisable. I don't believe they would be. I think the more likely scenario would be the property would be redeveloped at some time to be more efficient. And if it were to be leased to separate tenants, that would be probably the most reasonable scenario going forward. To redemise this property of this age, the cost would likely be prohibitive. That's my sense. So, but again, it's a very good question. We've used a rentable area or leasable area of 487,728. Again, very, very difficult to find rental comps. I've provided 12 for you here. I've also included for the purpose of this exercise, solely a size differential chart, just to illustrate even these very, very large properties. So anything over 100,000 square feet in our market, they are still much smaller than our subject. So we have to account for that when we're trying to apply an appropriate rent. So Mr. Harling has quite rightly pointed out that economies of scale should be in play here, and frankly, that concept simply states that as the square footage goes up, then the rental rate on a per unit basis should go down, and I certainly agree with that. The question is, well, how much? Well, and I believe Mr. Harling said a much larger building should have a much lower rent, and I certainly agree with that. So on page 14, and I've checked the calculation, Ms. Boretsky, I think it should be correct this time. Apologies for the previous. We have 411,192 feet on the main floor. We've applied $3.30. We've applied $3.30 for the second floor. I'd mentioned that in some cases we would use a lower rent on the second floor. In this case, we're satisfied with a $3.30 rent for the main and the second floor. Mezzanine space, which in the eyes of the market, once again, is not typically applied a separate rental rate, but by BOMA standard, we are to assess or place value on elements that are present. So if it's there, we have to account for it, and we've done that again using our same best practice methodology of applying a half rent to the mezzanine. So over that 487,724 square feet, we've applied $3.14, and that's blended. That's a market rent per annum of just north of $1.5 million. So as you can imagine, that would be an exceptionally high rent in the industrial sector. So we're trying to be fair and balanced, and I think that this all makes sense. Our rents that we've provided here, I've tried to use rents that are obviously the first order of business is to find rents that are in buildings that are clean and over 100,000 square feet. Finding anything close to 500,000 square feet is not possible. We do not have leased premises to that degree in this city, so we have to use our best judgment and be very careful not to over apply the rent, because it's impactful when we have a site size this large. So I've provided you with a number of rents. I think that the best ones are likely the first three, Sherwin, and the two on Barrie. Again, the size differential is huge. It's 200% differential between the actual property and the comparables. The effective ages are also should be taken into account. So our property, though the assessor has applied an effective age of 1952, the structural age is predominantly 1940. That's simply another unique feature of this property. Let's say we have an enormous property that's over 80 years old. I think by the age life table, if you were to use the cost approach, you would expect average age life of probably 50 or 60 years, I would imagine. So we're well beyond that. So that would increase the risk profile. I mentioned earlier that anything over 100,000 square feet, single tenant, we adjust our cap rate. So this is no different. We've certainly applied a cap rate that we believe to be commensurate with the unique size of the building. 4.5% vacancy is fine. I will point out that when you have a larger building like this that is owner occupied, you will have some inefficiencies. You have a property that's this old, you'll have inefficiencies. So there will be space that is not necessarily completely usable. We've not adjusted vacancy. We have tried to capture all of these unique features in the application of an appropriate cap rate. For this property, we're using a cap rate of no less than 8%. It has to be, it's an outlier. We've established that it's an outlier. It should be treated as such. So if you go to my page 26, you can see that based on an NOI of 1,329,443, that's 1,329,443, capitalized with an 8% cap rate, we could come to an indicated market value of $16,618,038, which we then round to $16,618,000. The balance of the brief is the, well, I've included, I mean, it's there. You can see that the increase cycle over cycle is exorbitant from our perspective. That's included. I don't believe a percentage review is done on this file. And that's led to what I'll call a distortion, to be quite blunt. Page 29 shows the different commercial, it's called the commercial section details. And this is where we see the, this is what's informed our table early on, where we're showing you that over 80% of the building is indeed built in 1940. Then we have the assessor's work. So basically, very unique property, enormous. It's even larger when we consider that it does rely on the adjacent property at 1800 Sargent for parking. It's connected by a tunnel. That's not a common feature. That's quite unique. So based on this campus setup, as Mr. Harling has pointed out as well, it is very unique, and it should be treated in a way that likely falls outside the purview of what the model is able to adequately assess. From my perspective, it is sort of a one of a kind property. With all of that being said, the cap rate of 8% is very well supported, makes sense. We're not suggesting that it's a non-investment grade property. I know that that's where we start with our 8% is typically where we would start with a non-investment grade, 7.5 to 8%. But in this instance, we are capturing the extraordinarily low land to building, the lack of parking, the original age, and the fact that we would have to find a participant in our market who requires over 500,000 square feet of space and is willing to pay over $1.5 million a year for it. So that would be very, very unique. So with that, we feel very supported in our value of $16,618,000, and I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on the applicant's presentation, Mr. Harling?
Just one. I'll just keep it kind of fairly brief. I think we both alluded to the fact that yes, this is a very large piece of property. Trying to find like a comparable rents would be very it's just they don't exist. Obviously, I think it's pretty evident. So. I guess you did kind of just allude to when you were kind of talking about some of your comparables on page 14 your brief. You were just kind of saying, oh, so these, I think you're mentioning the first 4 would have been most comparable. I'm still mindful of the fact they're much larger. These are much smaller than the subject. I guess I just wanted to question is that there's just 2 comparables I just wanted to mention is like the ones on Barrie, 8 number comparable 3 and 4 at the $2.75 and $2. Like that's I just looked into those. That's Park and Fly that uses those leases, correct? Or rents that space out. I guess it would be.
Park and Fly is number 3. Buys and Transport is number 2.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. So I'm just saying. Yeah. That's fine. I guess the Park and Fly. That's just more like a parking garage. People long-term parking their cars and stuff like that.
I think that's effectively what they do. I wouldn't put a huge amount of weight onto that one, but again, we're trying to find leased premises that are over 100,000 square feet. I certainly haven't found any at 200,000 square feet, nor have I found any at 300 or 400 or bordering 500,000 square feet. So you're right, that's not a great comp, but when we look at, I think it speaks to our cap rate request that this is extraordinary. It's very unique, but I don't disagree with you. I think that comp number 1 is actually very good. That was built between 64 and 86, professionally managed, owned by a trust, and that rent is $365. So, and it's much smaller. So, again, very difficult. It's theoretical at best to determine a rent, but when we look at some of these indicators, we feel very supported. And we also, to be fair, Mr. Harling, I know it's not your work, it's the model, but we should capture the fact that we have different types and qualities of space in this building, such as the mezzanine and the 2 floors. So I feel very confident about the rents that we've put forward today.
Okay. And I don't think there's, in terms of the cap rate, I think you kind of went into it. Obviously, I think we both indicated there's, you're not gonna be able to find a sale of a cap rate to drive a cap rate, obviously. And like you said, I guess, so, I guess like the other property we're speaking to, 11925 Dallas, you were considering it a class A, obviously, because I'm mindful it's significantly newer and it's much better quality. So so this is, I guess you're still saying this is a class B, like you'd still consider an investment grade? Because I know the range of cap rates is 6.5 to 7.5. So, but I guess your position is like obviously based on the uniqueness, you made adjustments, I guess is what your position is, I guess, whatever. So
yes, indeed, and it is, and I'm cautious not to talk about previous discussions, but it is in line with how we've always treated this property. So we're mindful not to create distortions for the owner year over year. We're careful to ensure that the unique nature of this property is captured, and I don't know that the model has the ability to do that, quite frankly. So yes, it's not, we're not suggesting that it's of poor quality. We are suggesting that it is extraordinarily unique and it should be treated as such. So that's why we've applied a higher than average cap rate. And it's frankly, I think it's a bit light, but I think that an 8% cap rate makes sense on this property. But you're quite right, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to find a direct comp to drive a cap rate. So we have to use our best judgment.
okay. And I was just curious because, like, unfortunately, I've never because I know that obviously there is that little bit of a breezeway between these two buildings. So is it the same type of because unfortunately I've never inspected it. Have you had a chance to inspect it, I guess, or do you know what
No,
okay.
Our folks in our office, I believe, have inspected it in the past. We have notes on it. Certainly spoken with the owner. And sorry, are you asking about the breezeway? It is all connected. Is that your question?
No, sorry. I was just, I guess my question was really like what they're doing is like, I guess like basically it's the same. What they're doing in these buildings is the same as what they're doing in the newer one at 1855 L, just manufacturing parts and such and everything.
The newer building that we dealt with earlier is more specialized. This is more. My understanding is a majority of more of this space is more manufacturing, and it's not the. I would call the first one we looked at more of call it a high tech building. This is more of a. This is something slightly different. So yes, they are working on parts, but we're not. Again, we're very, very careful not to commingle the business value with the realty value. But you're quite correct that the first property that we looked at is more high tech, the laser rooms and the clean rooms and that sort of thing. And that addition that you'd mentioned here in the back of your brief, that's a very, very small area that they've developed. So the predominant area is indeed manufacturing, and again, it's not retail or whatever the model has suggested this time. It is manufacturing.
Okay. That is all my questions. Then thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
Just one clarification. I see you using the number 477, 724 or 728 occasionally, but your final value is the same as the assessors at 487, 728.
Sorry.
You're using 477 in a couple of places. That's
square. Oh, no, the leasable area is 487, 724, and that's actually that's itemized.
What's in your final calculation?
Oh, you're right. Yeah, no, it's the final calculation. We're accepting the 477. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. Leasable area is not in dispute. Yeah.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. The mezzanine that you. Okay, do you know where the mezzanine is? Is it in the buildings where it's 25 foot high?
That's a good question. The mezzanine is, if you go to page 8, mezzanine area is in the 22-foot section. So that's considered building 2. And that is the mezzanine. So it's in one of the original buildings from 1940, metal frame building. It has a plan area of 185,434 and a MES of 48,229. That's on
So would-
page 8 of my brief, Mr. Murphy.
Right, I see that. Thank you. So would it be fair to assume that it's about halfway up the wall in the height, the mezzanine?
I would presume that would be the case. Ringing the outer exterior and about halfway up the wall, that would be typical. Without inspecting it personally, I would be speculating, but I think that's probably a fair assumption.
Well, you've basically cut the rent in half for the mezzanine areas, even though it's still 11 feet high, below it and above it. So do you think that's a fair assumption to make, that it's only worth half of the rest of the
Oh,
building?
yes, I think to be fair, in the eyes of the market, the mezzanine would be applied $0. The mezzanine doesn't typically demand a higher rent or any rent. It's generally, if you're leasing a building, you'll have the rent per foot. The rent per foot will be based on the leasable area on the main, and then it'll say includes mezzanine space. So we would rarely see any kind of leasing documents from the market showing that there's a separate rental rate for the mezzanine. So in the eyes of the market, that value should be $0, and the rent should be based on the main floor only. But as I had mentioned in the previous file, when we have a mezzanine based on the BOMA standards and for assessment purposes, we have to apply something. So our best practice has always been, for as long as I've been doing this, to apply half of a half rent to the mezzanine. But in the eyes of the market, that should be included in the main floor rent.
Even if there's offices up on the mezzanine?
Yeah, that would be typical market behavior to not have an extra. Now, the overall main floor rent might be slightly higher if that's the case. In this case, we have the mezzanine is not it's not a huge contribution in the grand scheme. But no, we don't typically see separate lease rates for mezzanine. They're not separately leasable, obviously, and they're typically blended into the main floor. So we use a half rent on the mezz, but in the eyes of the market, it would likely be blended into the main floor rent. That's typical.
However, you did mention, not on this property, but on the previous property, you mentioned that the city just disregarded the mezzanine. But
well, I'm not sure
perhaps
how they
included it too, right?
Well, I'm not. What I was alluding to is I'm not sure how they've well, because it's a model, they simply have the overall leasable area, and then it kicks out a modeled rent. Now, I don't know how that is blended, or if it's bifurcated by quality of space. So if they use the same rent on the mezzanine that they use on the main floor, I would suggest that's not appropriate. We would use a half rent for the mezzanine, and that is typical practice.
I have no further questions. Anything in summation, Mr. Harling?
For this one, I think I'm good. I'll let the board make their decision based on the evidence. Thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Story?
Yes, sir. Just very quickly. Again, I think we've established here we have a very unique building. It's from 1940. We've got an extremely low land to building. We have reliance for parking and other issues on the adjacent building at 1800 Sargent. So it is an outlier and should be treated as such. I don't think the model has adequately captured the site-specific attributes of the property. So we will respectfully submit that the cap rate of no less than 8% certainly makes sense, and I believe that our rental rate application is more in line with how the market would treat this property. So we do respectfully submit that the value not exceed 16,618, and we will point out once again that we have provided you with full cap rate study indicating our assumptions, and you've not received any support for the cap rates put forward by the assessor, save for the summarized brokers table. So I think that our position on cap rate is grounded in reality, and we would ask that be given weighted consideration. I thank you.
Okay, that will then conclude item number 2, 660 Barry. Would a break be appropriate? Is everybody ready for another short break?
I think we could take a 10-minute one.
Yeah, okay. So let's make it like about 7 or 8 minutes, okay? 8 to cut it.
Sounds good.
Okay, we are back in order. The next property is item 3, 1460 Dublin. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. There's preliminary issue that on this one, Mr. Applicant and Mr. Assessor.
I can.
yes,
You
Mr.
want,
Chair.
you want to speak to
So-
Chair? Yeah. you can
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, we're simply asking that this be confirmed today. After we filed the appeal, we learned that the building was raised and it will be subject to a supplementary. So Mr. Harling and I will work together to write to the, or to correct the roll as of the date of demolition. So the building that we were to look at is no longer there. Therefore, a supplementary will be required. So we're going to request that this assessment be confirmed, and we will we'll work on the supplementary process based on the raising of the previous improvement. So simply asking for confirmation today, sir.
Okay, so then, Mr. Harling, I will just ask you to read the property in and go over it in general, and we'll on that basis. Okay.
Okay, can I start now, Mr. Chairman? Is that good, or?
Okay. Yeah, you can start now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so the file number is 24-2379. The roll number is 13099071345. The address is 1460 Dublin Avenue. The owner is White Owl Properties Limited. The 2025 roll year, based on a reference date of April 1st, 2023, is assessed at $11,640,000. So as Mr. Story had mentioned, I can actually just kind of allude to a bit more of that information about the current status of the property. So if you actually turn to page 18 of my brief, you'll just see there was a permit issued for a demolition. And actually, if you look on page 19 of my brief, there's actually just showing a picture of the area that's being demolished. So so basically, you know, this building is already in the process of being demolished. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's fully demolished, but it's definitely going to be soon. I'm assuming, or finished, wrapped up soon. And at that time, we will issue a supplementary notice based on the removal of the building. So, so yeah, that's the situation with this property. So,
Okay.
so yeah, I guess I'll kind of conclude the presentation because yeah, the building really isn't. There's the value that we're assessing would not be relevant at this time. So.
Okay. Is there any questions from anybody? Applicant?
No.
No, sir, just requesting confirmation so we can sort of the supplementary issue. Yeah.
Okay. And we'll leave it at that then. Request confirmation. That will conclude item number 3, 1460 Dublin then. We will move on to item number 5, 200 Old Man's Creek. And this is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. You may proceed, Mr. Harling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 24-2563. The roll number is 1309-541-2200. The address is 200 Omens Creek Boulevard, and the owner is RW Consumer Products Limited. 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1st, 2023, assessed at $4,512,000. If we look under page 1, this is the property description. You can see here there are 2 buildings on the premise. The actual year builds and effective year built are 2001. The wall heights range from 12 feet to 23 feet. The land area is 95,263, and with a plan area of 30,807 square feet, which gives us a land to plan area of 3.09, and an overall leasable area of 33,545 square feet. If we turn to page 2 of my brief, you'll see the request for information having been received. See some of the sale history. There's no recent sales, and there are no subject property leases in place. Okay, if we turn to page 3 of my brief, you'll see the subject property location. So this is located on Omens Creek Boulevard. So you kind of just see kind of an overview where it's located here. So just east of it would be Brookside Boulevard. Northeast would be Oak Point Highway, and then just south is Logan Avenue. So kind of in the, kind of get the area, an idea of where it's located. Turn to page 4 of my brief. This just gives you more of a Google image view, just to see the building and where how its property is situated here. Again, where it's located on Orange Creek Boulevard. This is continued on page 5. You'll just see the actual parcel outline of the subject. So you can just kind of see here with the red outline where it's located and the outside, the shape of the parcel and the site. Okay, this is located, if you go to page 6, this is just a more zoomed in photo. Again, just the parcel outline. And again, this is continued on page 7, just showing the aerial view. Okay, now if we turn to page 8 of my brief, this just gives you more of an idea of the subject property here. So you can see here where it's located and the shape of the parcel as well as the building here. So as you can see here, we have in the back of the building, that would be more of the storage warehouse space. And you can see the front here, this is kind of more of would be more of the office space. You can see here, the 2 stories here they have for the office space, and then some loading bay doors they have in the front of the building. So you can see how it's laid out. Page 9 of our brief is just another angle view of the subject property. Page 10 is just a rear view of the property. And then page 11 is just another zoomed in photo just to see the building. And then on page 12, now you can just get a street view photo of the subject. So you can just get a better view of how it looks from a street view. So you can kind of see how the building's set up. Okay, so now if we turn to page 13 of my brief, we'll see the subject property, the income workup. So this is a manufacturing warehouse light we classified as. The leasable area is 33,545 square feet, applying a land model rent of $7.19 a square foot, which gives us a potential rent of $241,189. We're allowing 3.5% for vacancy, which gives us an effective gross income of $232,747. We're allowing 3% for non-critical expenses and $4 a square foot shortfall to cost to cover vacancy, which gives us an overall net operating income of $221,069. And then lastly, we're applying an overall capitalization rate of 4.9%, which gives us the estimated value of $4,512,000. Okay, so if we turn to page 14 of my brief, see some of the rent, you see the rent comparables. So these comparables, you can see where they're located here. So we have 130 White Road, 89 Bunting Street, 1670 Inkster, 2240 Logan, 90 Hutchings Street, and 190 Owens Creek Boulevard. So these start dates range from March 2020 to January 1st, 2023. Lease terms range from 1 to 10 years. Leasable areas range from 17,360 square feet to 50,235 square feet. The wall heights range from 12 feet to 25 feet. Effective year builds range from 1964 to 2000. And the net rents range from $7 a square foot to $9.20 a square foot. So yeah, I believe the model rent we've applied falls in line with the falls in line with the rent comparables. I don't like to say I have one best comparable, but 190 Owens Creek is actually just next door to the subject property. So and you can see here it's slightly larger, similar wall heights, slightly older. So I believe this would be the closest comparable in the sense being right next door, and this is a $725 rent. So I believe that would, like I said, I'm not trying to pick one particular rent, but that would be the closest, I believe, to the subject. Page 15 of my brief. So again, we applied a 4.9% cap rate. So, this does fall outside the outside sources as well as the subject, the city's parameters. I know we've had a lot of discussions about cap rates today, obviously about different variations. So some of the factors, I guess, I believe that would derive a cap rate would be, the size of the building. It does have like an office component in the front there, as you can see. I'm mindful of it's not a significant component, but there is still office space there. It's a good location. The land plan ratio is a bit higher, at 3 to 1, so that has some potential for expansion. Built in 2001, wall heights are 12 to 23. 12 feet wall heights would be more for the office space, and the 23 would be more the warehouse space. So those would be some of the factors that would derive the cap rate. Page 16 of my brief is just some municipal assessment actors information. Page 17 of my brief is just the income and expense mailer. This is fully owner occupied, as you can see here, page 17. So there are obviously no lease in place. This is continuing on page 18 and 19 and 20. And then pages 21, this is just a floor plan I was able to find on file, so you can just kind of just see I apologize, maybe it's hard to see. It wasn't in color, so. And then page 22, this is just another further photo of the floor plan. So again, just to show the outline of the area of the building. So, and lastly, on page 23 is just some vacancy report information. That being said, I believe that concludes my presentation, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any question on the assessor's presentation?
I do, yes. Okay, Mr. Harling, just very quickly, you mentioned the office component. Now, that office component comprises about 22% of the overall space, correct?
Yeah, it's not a significant amount of the area, but yeah, so.
No, for industrial properties, we would typically expect about 10%, would we not? That would be considered
yes,
ideal.
in terms of what the typical would be, I guess that would be more in line, I guess, yeah, so.
So it would be somewhat over officed for other users, potentially? Is that fair?
You know, I don't know if I mean, I understand there's a standard, but I don't know if I don't know if I per se 100% agree with that. But yes, I mean, you're right. It's a bit more than typical, I guess. Yeah. So.
Okay, and that 3-to-1 that's standard. So you mentioned potential for expansion, but that 3-to-1 is actually I think we've established this would be on the low end of the standard. As I've mentioned, 3 or 4-to-1 would be typical. Is that not fair comment?
It's pretty typical. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And this property is indeed pinned in by a rail line, correct?
In the back, there is a rail line. Yes, correct.
Okay. And I think the online record, when you pull it up, would indicate that the property is negatively influenced by that rail line. Is that fair?
I don't have that information in my brief, so I can't speak to that. So.
Okay. Irregular shape. Is that fair? This parcel is not a typical shape. It would be considered irregular.
It is slightly irregular at the back, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, your rents. To be frank, I'm using $7. You're using $7.19. We're not worlds apart. Sorry, I just want to look at your comps here. I'm sorry. You said 190 is your best comp, correct?
That would be the most, I believe, similar. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. Don't disagree with that. The expenses. Did you calculate them in this building?
I did not calculate them.
Okay. So just very quickly, and these don't have anything atypical like we saw in the previous that would lead to a much higher rate. But these, by my calculation, are they're more than double the actual shortfall. They're I think $850 a foot, $840 I have. Does that make sense? You take the 281, 642, add in the business tax, you're at 295, and divide that by the floor area. That gets you to about, depending if you use the plan of the floor, it's 840 to 860 a foot. Does that make sense?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay, so we can agree that the expenses are running higher than the modeled allowance, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah, and then the higher.
Okay. Yep. And again, sorry, that cap rate of only 4.9%, that would be well below. That would be well outside of the 20th percentile that the city's put forward. But my main concern is if we look at this as a single tenant. I mean, the brokers are suggesting no less than 5.75. So, and we're going to suggest something higher. So, how does I guess, why is the model treating this property as vastly superior than even the 20th percentile of your own submission here?
I guess first thing I'll mention is I understand the lowest on the end is actually 5.25, not 5.75, but regardless, yeah, like I said, I'm mindful of that does fall outside the 20th percentile. Like I think I kind of mentioned it before with the previous property. There are properties that would fall on both spectrums. Like for example, the one we spoke to at 660 Barry, we were indicating an 8% cap rate, based on some of those issues. So there's going to be cap rates that are on the higher end and the lower end. I think some of the factors I mentioned again, age, size, location. Those would be some of the influences or the factors that would derive the cap rate. So
okay.
That's all I can really kind of speak to that.
And so in terms of how these cap rates are generated, do you know generally how many sales would have been entered into the model to derive this output? Do we have any sense of what the inputs were? If in order to understand the output, it's good to understand the inputs. So do you have any sense of what was inputted in the model? How many sales? The vintage of the sales? What what quadrants they were in? Anything for our edification today?
I do not have the information of what was gone into it. So I'm mindful there are sales that are used, but I don't have the exact inputs or parameters. I'm sorry.
Okay. That is okay. I will leave that there, Mr. Chair. I'll save the balance of my comments for my presentation, and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitford, any questions?
Just a quick confirmation then. You said the model derived the numbers. Was any manual calculation done to the cap?
There was nothing. No, there was no manual calculation done.
Thank you. Okay, I have no further questions.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Okay, Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation.
Yes, thank you, sir. Okay, so we are indeed at 200 Almonds Creek. This, for the sake of brevity, this is effectively going to be predominantly a cap rate argument. So I'll try and tailor my presentation to that. As we mentioned, we have an industrial property with office. It does have a higher degree of office finish than what we typically expect. An ideal ratio is generally considered about 10%. This one is about double that. It is on the north side of Almonds Creek Boulevard. It's just east of Brookside. It was built in 2001. The office section has masonry wall construction and 12-foot ceiling heights. The warehouse component is steel frame, gross floor area of 28,077 square feet with 23-foot wall height. So that would be, again, we were talking about super adequacies and what might be considered ideal in the newer supply, and 2001 would still be considered newer based on our industrial supply in Winnipeg. We have an irregular site shape, as you can see on the photos. It's about 2.2 acres, and we have a typical or a lower than ideal, but generally considered typical land to plan of 3.09 to 1. Now, I've used a $7 rent. The assessor has used $7.19. I've provided you with comparables. I have a good comp at 199 Almonds Creek. It's right across the street. However, it is older. It's built in 1979. That's a $5.25 rent. Based on the rents that I've put forward, we see an average of $6.95 and a median of $6.45. We will use $7 in our calculation. Again, we're only marginally different from the assessor in that regard. 4.5% vacancy 3.5% vacancy based on this area. This market area is applied. That does not appear to be in dispute. I had mentioned that the actual expenses do tend to run a little bit higher in this building, so we have to consider that. Though we've accepted the shortfall of $4, we do recognize that the expenses are a little bit higher. That may be due to the over office component. I'm not sure, but ultimately, I am able to make a slight adjustment here. I think the 6.5 cap rate is slightly is too aggressive for this property, so I'm going to adjust my cap rate to 6%. We are able to do that on review when it makes sense. So I'm going to submit to the board that our NOI of 215,102, capitalized with the cap rate of 6%. Make sure this math is correct. 215,102. Yes, indeed. That's $3,585,000 and $33, which we then round to $3,585,000. I think that 6.5 is a little aggressive for this property. 6% makes better sense. It's a good quality property. It has some issues with land building. It's over office, but it certainly suits the needs of this user and other users. So I think that a standard cap rate of 6% is appropriate in this instance. So I will make that adjustment. I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, but ultimately our revised position is indeed based on an NOI of 215,102, $215,102, and then capitalized with a more appropriate cap rate of 6%. Leads us to an indicated market value of $3,585,000, and we think that value makes sense for this for the purpose of our exercise today. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harling, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
Maybe just one quick question. I mean, I think we're not too far apart in terms of the rent. Obviously, I know that the disputes cap rate. So I appreciate you making that adjustment there on the cap rate. So, I guess just like a question, how you have the chart here with the investment category. So I guess based on the adjustment, is it fair to say you'd be considering this more like a Class A property? I guess in that sense, I guess then, or is it not? You're not really kind of pigeoning it into that. I was just kind of curious.
Well, I would say that this property would be, yes, I suppose it would fall in the lower end of the A's. So it's not, now to be fair though, it's not like the properties on Haggard and Brookport phase 2, like those newer properties, those are something different. This is a good quality property in an older industrial area. It doesn't benefit from the kind of land to plan that we see in some of the newer properties, but we do have to once again recognize the positives with the negatives. So I think that it would be, if it's an A, it would be on the low end, but I think ultimately with all points taken into consideration, the 6 cap makes sense in this instance.
Okay, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
We have Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
And I have no questions. Anything in summation, Mr. Harling?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Anything in summation, Mr. Story?
No, just believe that now that we've adjusted that cap rate, we believe that the value of $3,585,000 is appropriate, and would ask that the board adjust the assessment on that basis. And I thank you.
Okay. Therefore, that will conclude item 5, 200 Oldmans Creek. We have heard all the items scheduled at this hearing, and it is now adjourned. Thank you very much, Mr. Story and Mr. Harling, for your presentations. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
I know.